po' boys are another classic Louisiana food that I had to get around to making on this channel. They're typically made with fried seafood, but they can also be made with deli meats like roast beef or sausage, and they're uniquely characterized by the light style of French bread that's found in New Orleans. And in case you didn't know, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm going to show you how I make my favorite, which is the fried shrimp po' boy. And this is a fairly simple recipe to make. The only real prep comes in the form of whatever meat you're making for the sandwich. And for my fried shrimp, I'm choosing to do a buttermilk marinade, which I don't think is super necessary for this, like it would be with fried chicken for instance, but it's still going to help impart some seasoning into our shrimp. And instead of going out and buying a carton of buttermilk that I'm only going to use a couple of cups of and waste the rest, I'm going to try this other method that I have, which is using this buttermilk powder. I'm assuming it's just dehydrated buttermilk, and it works really well when making homemade ranch or other sauces like that. But to reconstitute it into a buttermilk-like consistency for a marinade, I'm just going to add a couple of cups of water to a bowl. And then this says 4 tablespoons of powder per cup of water, so about 8 tablespoons worth. I'm not really measuring. I'm whisking all that to break up most of the clumps, although it's almost impossible to get them all out. And this looks a lot thinner than the whole milk buttermilk that I would use for marinades at the store. But I think this works in a pinch and is better than just regular water. I'm also going to season this mixture with a couple of pinches of salt and then some MSG. And then most important here is Cajun or Creole seasoning. I always use Tony's, and I have this extra spicy version. Maybe a couple teaspoons of that. And then I'm just supplementing with a little bit more of garlic powder and smoked paprika, as well as some Louisiana hot sauce. That gets one final mix, and then I'm going to add in my shrimp. And living in Louisiana, I always have access to fresh caught shrimp, and I would always recommend that. However, I know that's not feasible for everybody, and I didn't even feel like buying fresh shrimp this time. Plus, those shrimp are a lot bigger than what I typically put on a po' boy, so I'm just using medium-sized frozen shrimp here. I'd say a pound could get you 3 really nice sized sandwiches, but you could probably stretch it to 4. And mine are still frozen because they're going to thaw in this mixture because I'm going to let it go for a few hours. But if you're making this immediately, I would thaw these out before putting them in the buttermilk. So like I said, I gave that 4 hours in the fridge while I prepped everything else, which is not really much. You just need a dry mixture to coat these before frying. And traditionally used here is some finely ground cornmeal if you can find it. I'm doing about equal parts of that with all-purpose flour, maybe a little bit extra flour. And then I'm going to season this with all the same seasonings I added to the marinade, except I'm adding black pepper to this. I don't really know why I didn't put that in the marinade. Just put generous amounts because that flavor on the outside is really important to the shrimp. I just whisk all that together and set aside until I'm ready to fry. And then traditional po' boy toppings are really easy. Of course, you could go out and put whatever you want on this, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to keep it traditional, starting with some iceberg lettuce. I'm just cutting that in half and then finally shaving down the sides of this to get some shredders. And then I'm just going to get some slices of fresh tomato. We're also going to add pickles later, but those don't need to be prepped because they're already coming out of the jar. And then traditionally, po' boys are just slathered with some mayo, but I'm going to spice it up just a bit. So I'm adding some kewpie mayo to a bowl and then generous amounts of that Tony seasoning, more black pepper, more Louisiana hot sauce, and then finishing with a little splash of white vinegar. I just want this to stand out a hair more than the typical mayo would. And now finally, let's talk about bread. Like I said, po' boy bread is a unique style of French bread that's local to New Orleans. It's made with more water and less flour, so it comes out a lot lighter than a regular French bread does. So locally, we buy Leidenheimer bread, which is the original German company that made po' boy bread back in the 1800s here. It's available abundantly here, but I know it's probably harder to find around you, so you can use any French bread and it'll work. I just cut these into about 8-inch sections, and then I split the middle almost all the way through, just leaving a hinge. That'll allow you to hold the sandwich together better, and these are kind of eaten vertically anyway with the amount that they're stuffed. And these aren't traditionally toasted, by the way. You could definitely spread some butter on these and toast them in the oven or on the stove, and it would probably come out better in my opinion, and I would probably do it, but I'm just keeping it traditional, or I'm just being lazy. But you can set everything aside, and the last thing we need to do is fry up our shrimp. All I need to do is drip off the excess buttermilk and individually drop these into the dry dredge. I'm just going a few at a time and shaking the dry mixture over these until they're fully coated. Obviously, make sure nothing is sticking, and then set these aside and repeat with all the rest of the shrimp. Meanwhile, I took out my cast iron Dutch oven and candy thermometer and set them over high heat. I'm frying these in my used canola oil that I've used for savory recipes. I'm going to want to get this up to between 350 and 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Throughout the frying process, mine fluctuated between 325 and 375. Anywhere in there is fine. I had about a pound of shrimp, and I'm doing this in 2 batches for reference. Just carefully dropping in the shrimp a little bit at a time, trying not to let anything stick. So after a few seconds, I'm using my spider tool to break them apart, albeit gently.
Albeit? What are you, a Harvard professor now? Lay off, bro. What's next? Are you gonna keep us all abreast of how to build the sandwich? Yes, actually. So annoying, dude. I wouldn't let things bother me that easily. It leads to a pretty miserable life. Or should I say, your experience could be quite disconsolate. That's fair.
Shrimp cook super fast, so these are done within about 2 minutes. Just keep a really close eye on them. If you overcook them, they become rubbery and not pleasant. Honestly, I think that's what calamari tastes like, so I don't really know why anybody enjoys that. Anyway, once these are done, I'm pulling them off to a wire rack, and a very important step here is one final layer of seasoning. I have this sweet Cajun seasoning that a friend of mine gifted me, but you could just reuse the Tony's from before. I'm just getting a nice coating on the outside of these while it's still hot. I think this provides a noticeable flavor difference that, in my opinion, is necessary for the shrimp to stand out in this sandwich. Then I'm just repeating with the second batch of shrimp, and we're ready to build our po' boys. So I'm starting with my untoasted bread, and then I'm layering on a bunch of my mayo mixture. Be super generous with that. I get a nice layer of shreddis on the bottom, and then I cover that with some tomato slices. And a very important step, don't forget to season your tomatoes with salt and pepper. Then just some sliced pickles like I mentioned earlier, and then finally some really big handfuls of your fried shrimp. I mentioned before that this will really only make 3 sandwiches if you fill them correctly. We like to overstuff our po' boys here, so it's basically falling out as you eat it. I personally like to snack on those extra popcorn shrimp that fall out throughout the eating process. But this is the beauty of a sandwich. Pretty simple in my opinion. I feel like the bread is what makes it, but whatever meat that you use and whatever process you use to cook it is really important as well. But I'm hungry and ready to get to the taste test.
This is the proper way to stuff a po' boy. As a final touch, we like to shake a little bit of Louisiana hot sauce in there. This is perfection. It's pretty easy to find good po' boy restaurants outside of New Orleans because they're really easy to make. So find yourself something local or make it yourself. Cheers. Come on, bro. What more could you ask for? You could do this with grilled shrimp, but I think fried is just the classic way. That little crisp on the outside makes this amazing. I think adding that dash of Cajun seasoning after you fry takes this another level up, but it's really hard to screw this thing up. It's only a few ingredients. These things cost probably like $17.95 now, but they used to be for poor people. I do think the type of bread you use can make or break this, and I know not everyone can find Leidenheimer bread around them, but just try to find something quality, it'll make a difference. But I've been wanting to do this one for a while. It's another Cajun staple. And also I've been told I don't make enough seafood on this channel. Specifically, I've never made fish before, at least on video. So if you have any suggestions there, let me know. But that's gonna do it for me today. Thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. I should have made this before festival season, but better late than never.